Good morning, and firstly, thanks to the other guys. Over the last couple of days, we've been practicing our presentations, trying to get them right for you guys, but I hadn't actually heard these other guys' presentations till this morning, and I was sitting there thinking, gee, this is quite good, and then I actually realised I had to get up and talk. So, this morning I'm going to cover my Nuffield topic, which is looking at the systems that run large dairy businesses. It is with our sponsors' help that makes all this possible. So my sponsor was Dairy Australia, and Dairy Australia not only kicked the tin to fund our Nuffield Scholarships, but Nuffield really relies on the networks that are formed out of Dairy Australia, and as I travelled around the world, Dairy Australia were fantastic at being able to connect me to other people. Nuffield is about a huge amount of collaboration to allow us to go on a journey which is really life-changing. And so I'm very thankful to a number of people and some of the fascinating things I've seen. So I'm very thankful to Anthony Bradsma, who at the time was the Tasmanian chair and a 2006 scholar. He was the guy who rang me up, I think, 4 times, and after the 4th time I finally agreed to actually apply for a Nuffield Scholarship. I kept telling him I was too busy, I had too much on, I didn't know whether I'd be able to fit it in. But what he said was, exactly as was said before from Chris, is actually thinking you're really important in your business can actually be, can undo you in your business. So figuring out how to get away from the business you're working in is something that most Nuffielders figure out through their period of study. I'm very thankful to my wife, Alice, and my 4 kids. I was away a lot, as we all were, and it was their support that sort of makes it all worth it. My employer at the time, the Van Diemen's Land Company in Tasmania, were great and able to accommodate my travel. Some of my other travel buddies, I was on the India Global Focus program, and they really made it a fantastic year. In the US, a lady called Dairy Mary drove 500 miles across one of the northern states to pick me up and meet me. She'd never met me before. I stayed at a place, and then we went and looked at 2 massive dairy units, probably one of the largest dairy units I've been to in the world. That's sort of some of the support you get by the Nuffield network. I was also supported by Alter Genetics in the US, who hosted me, and also in Chicago by FC Stone. There's a great heap of New Zealanders who support Nuffield as well, and it's got a great network. And those of the newly awarded Nuffield Scholars, firstly, congratulations, but secondly, do tap into that network. It is very helpful. So as part of my journey, I've got to see up in the top left-hand corner kiwi fruit growing in the Netherlands, chilies in India. Beneath it, the scepticism that still exists in Qatar with regards to climate change. Beneath that is baby corn harvested in India. On the left, it's the phenomenal achievements of the Dutch with regards to farming below sea level, and also the massive industry that is aquaculture, and that photo was from Turkey. So the context for my study was that from April 2011, my role was as the business manager dairy for the Van Diemen's Land Company. The Van Diemen's Land Company farms in the northwest tip of Tasmania, and my job was to manage the operational and business performance of that large dairy business. And that business had 25 dairy farms, a total of 20,000 milking cows, another 10 or 12,000 young stock, 120 people, and we produced over 7 million kilograms of milk solids. So milk solids are the fat and the protein and the lactose that's in a litre of milk. And so to put it into litre terms, that's about 85 million litres of milk. So this is the far northwest tip of Tasmania, and if you ever get the opportunity, please go and have a look. It's an absolutely beautiful part of the world. This is the property called Woolnorth. And as you can see there, it's quite windy. In fact, it's so windy you'll see the wind turbine down in the sort of almost in the centre of the image without its blade on it, and that's because it is literally in the roaring 40s, and the wind comes through there in such gusts it's hit the cliff face and actually bends the rotors off. So it is a horrendously windy place. Winter time, a bad day is about 8 degrees maximum temperature, an overnight low, we'd probably there get maybe 1 or 2 frosts a year. And if it gets to 21 degrees in the middle of summer, we all strip off our clothes and go to the beach because that's a hot day. So it's a great place to grow perennial ryegrass, and it's a great place to be a dairy cow, except for on some of those really cold and miserable days. So my challenge, or my study topic, was how do we consolidate the information from across those 25 animal operations to actually monitor real time what's happening and then to adapt to change. And as we all know, in an agricultural business, we have fluctuating input prices. So in our model, a lot of that is urea and supplementary grain, and our output of obviously milk. And if we're not managing that, we'll end up with material impacts on our business profitability. So what I wanted to set out and find out was how do other large dairy businesses in other countries manage these challenges. So what did I do? I did a literature review, so I went and looked what was in the published literature, who had actually looked at these type of things, what systems had been published about. I used the connections from the Global Focus program, the business I was in, and through Nuffield. And then I went on relatively short but quite intensive periods of travel, and which was just great. I do just point out that my focus was in New Zealand and the United States. So there are definitely good quality, interesting businesses in Europe that could have helped me as well, but due to circumstance, I wasn't able to get there. So just quickly, as we all could do, we could fill up an hour with some of the photos and experiences we've gone through, but I'll share with you just 3 of my highlights. This is Christopher Noblehurst. He's a 5th generation farmer, 3rd generation dairy farmer in upper New York State. And every morning he wanders into the office, he gets a coffee, and he walks over and he looks at this screen. This is a direct feed screen from the Chicago Board of Trade, where he will see overnight changes to butter, cheese, soy, canola, wheat, and all of his other inputs. And that's how your average dairyman in the US starts their day. This is what is a excellent Excel spreadsheet used by Landcorp, New Zealand's largest farmer and New Zealand's largest dairy farmer that has, I think it's about 50 odd dairy farms. And this is what they use to manage and change management systems over time. Now, as you can see there, for those of you who've played with Excel a bit, it's got a huge amount of background programming, so it's not just one little basic Excel spreadsheet, and they drive a lot of their decisions off that. So when you go and look at price risk management and managing businesses, I obviously looked at a few cows, but not all my time is spent looking at cows. But this is also from Landcorp in New Zealand, in the middle of the North Island. And what it is a visual system by that farmer to put up every single one of his cows. So this is a 950 cow farm. And this is a classic example of excellent visual management that everyone on the farm can work through. So all those little boxes, and you can see some colours and things, they highlight each time a cow gets mastitis. They highlight if she had retained membranes. They highlight if she was lame. And unfortunately, if she dies, they're the ones with the crosses. So it's a really good way for a manager to be able to walk straight in and know exactly what's happening on his farm. And the real challenge is how you connect that with centralised data. So in terms of findings, the areas that I'll share with you are around the dairy farm management systems, price risk management, a plan that we developed and implemented for price risk management, and then some recommendations. So in terms of management systems, the US and the New Zealand have dominant systems for their system, and they work well but aren't easily adaptable to Australia. And that is disappointing, but it does present an opportunity in Australia to refine some of the systems we have. What is really important is actually linking that cow data into the total farm management system. And it's one of the challenges because, particularly in a grass-based dairy system, you're managing two systems. You're managing growing and harvesting grass, and you're also managing the animal. And being able to bring those two together is really important. What was quite surprising was the internet access, particularly in New Zealand, but also in large areas of the United States, is still limiting real-time data. And that is a problem in Australia, and it was interesting that it was a problem throughout the world. And what ultimately businesses need, and the best systems, integrated and connected data all the way from the person milking the cows to the CEO or the head owner of that business. And that is really important. And I describe it as the people milking the cows really should have a clear line of sight as to what they're doing and how that actually impacts on the total business. In terms of price risk management, I will have to apologise. There isn't any amazing discovery here, but I do want to draw out some key points. Firstly, for all of you who go back to your own businesses, think about what are the three key performance indicators for both your physicals, so how much milk you grow, how much grain you grow, how many hectares you're farming, and your key financials. And they're the things that you should be monitoring and measuring and managing on a daily, if not weekly basis. Think about lead indicators, indicators that are giving you a predictor of the future. And I picked up off Chris's slide. He had some, there was a slide there that said, know your harvest before it's ready, or something to that effect. And that's the sort of thing that we need to be thinking about. But for me, this is quite important, is that retrospective KPIs, how much milk we produced yesterday, is actually not going to help us manage future risk. So you need to think forward to manage risk. And particularly in the dairy industry, there is a lot of discussion in Australia and New Zealand as to what is the right system. And in New Zealand it ranges from 100% grass to almost a total mixed ration, so you're bringing all the feed in for the cows. And the same in Australia, and those who are 100% grass-based will stand here and argue with you all day that that's the only way to do it, and the guys at the other end of the spectrum will do the same. But look, to be fair, the debate is over. Every single production system can work and work well. So the real challenge is to actually understand your system, choose it, and then make it the most profitable it can be. And in order to do that, you will need benchmarking. The other thing is that dairy farmers must ultimately accept that they're in a commodity business and prices will fluctuate and it will be outside their control. And in the US, one of my takeouts was the amount of professional advice that was sought by dairy farmers. And it was almost the other end of the scale in New Zealand. And I think that both Australia and New Zealand, dairy farmers in particular, can benefit from understanding more about professional services to help them manage risk. So the system that we put up is a 9-point system, and I'll work through it relatively quickly. And when you really step back from this applies to most businesses. So firstly, define what you're doing. Second, understand your cost structure. Third, benchmark. And it was great again seeing Chris's presentation talking about benchmarking and how important that is. Because from there, you can then actually understand what things you can control and what things you can't. And understand where you are in price cycles. Because once you understand where you are in a price cycle, you can set price triggers for those inputs and outputs. You can either buy forward or sell forward or take the opportunity that exists. Then you can decide what your risk management strategy is. You can be 100% exposed or you can be 100% protected. And each of those have considerable impacts to your business. There are more and more tools becoming available in Australia, particularly in the last 3 years. Fixed milk pricing has become an available option that didn't exist prior, whereas Americans find it abnormal or unusual that they wouldn't be hedging a certain percentage of their milk. And then, once you've done it, start measuring it, and then reassess. And you've got to keep assessing where your position is on a regular basis. And I know that not all of you are dairy farmers, so I have two recommendations for everyone here, and that is that if you go down the route of installing some new software or hardware in the business, you just have to answer one really simple question, and that is, what do you need? There are some really good tools and programs out there, but there are also some very good salespeople, and you always need to be very clear on what your needs are. And the other one, which I mentioned before, is thinking about how you're linking that physical data in your business with the financial data and what levers you have on your business to adjust those. And for the dairy industry, firstly, there is the opportunity to develop new risk management tools. Chris, the dairy industry has taken a great step forward in the last 18 months. We've just basically gone over to New Zealand and copied their industry database called DairyBucks, and now that's rolled out for both Australia and New Zealand. And that allows, as a dairy farmer, for me to compare very much like your regions that you put there in Western Australia, so that I don't have to compare myself to everyone. I can compare someone who is feeding 1 tonne of grain per cow, in this rainfall, with no irrigation, for example. So it allows you to tailor, and then you're able to see where you really stand. And there's definitely opportunity for large-scale dairy, and that sits in two real big buckets. The first one is that located in Australia, and the second one is exporting our knowledge. And as mentioned before, I've recently moved to China, and so I'm an exporter. I just would like to finish off with some quick observations. As was mentioned this morning, a Nuffield Scholarship isn't just about your individual study topic. It's about the Contemporary Scholars Conference, which we heard about before morning tea, the Global Focus Program, which you'll hear a little bit about this afternoon, your individual study topic, and all the people you meet. And it's allowed me to see milking camels in Qatar. This device here is sort of like a converted slasher, but underneath it's like your barbecue turned upside down, and that's a propane gas tank. And that's how they kill weeds on organic farms. They burn them. Oysters in the Netherlands, chewing tobacco in the US, and ornamental orchids in the Netherlands. So my takeouts on global agriculture, some of you may have heard of the term of peak oil. We'll hit a point in the world where there's no more oil, we've found it all, and now we're chewing down in those reserves. If you look at the context of China and India, we have now hit peak land. And that is that, unlike Australia, there isn't vast tracts of land that still be either cleared or increased in its productivity. It's maxed out. It's at the top of its game. And beneath that comes peak water. And there's a report that suggests peak water will occur in India in 2020. And that is really, really scary. You've got 1.12 billion people who won't have water. And that's phenomenal. And what we really must maintain our focus in Australians on is our food safety and quality. So my final slide and my final learning was this was the first dairy farm I went to in India. And this is a barley sort of mash, and it sits in that concrete bunker behind me where I'm standing. They put it in there, they wet it, and they leave it for a couple of days, and then they scoop it out. My hand is wriggling with maggots. That's a cheap source of protein that they feed to their dairy cows. It's free. On that, I'll leave you. Thank you.